That's extremely disingenuous to try to use this as an indication that she's abandoned Medicare for all, for her saying if we can't get it through, we'll do this instead. I think every legislator should have a backup plan. Like, if I can't get my plan A, worst case scenario, we should go plan B. That should be true about everything. If I can't get $2 trillion of funding for this bill I want to get through, then we should try to get 1.8 trillion by appealing to this guy instead.
The amount of like hoops that Dylan is.
He's just saying that because he can't respond to what I'm saying. He doesn't know how to respond, so he's just saying I'm a mental gymnastics star, right? I'm just doing flips and stuff as he tries to claim that these tweets are enough to claim that AOC's abandoned Medicare for all. Her signature policy issue.
She also,
by the way, this is a primary example on how people who are political commentators on the internet should participate in local politics, state politics, national politics, maybe get involved in a few campaigns, maybe even manage a campaign. It could be a small one before commentating on the internet. Of course, this can't be a hard standard, but if we had more people on the internet who actually have that background, we would get a lot less takes like this. Anyway, let's start this off right off the bat. Let's go straight into the criticism of me. Okay, so this guy, Jackson Hinkle, Jackson Hinkle, right? He's growing quite fast. Good for him. I saw him just going through 20K. He's now at 20.5. You know what? I hope he keeps rising. Hope he keeps doing good. I first learned about this guy through a tweet where he basically monitored AOC's tweet history around the issue of Medicare for all, and I retweeted it, and I said I said something that amounted to, this is putting way too much weight into her Twitter posts. And he responded, we went back and forth, and he released this video. Then I was on Vosh's stream, and this is a separate incident. I was on Vosh's stream, and I was talking about why I don't really trust gray zone reporters, and how Bashar al-Assad's an evil dictator. And this guy produced a stream in response to that, talking about how Vosh had lied about Syria. Even though, to be 100% honest, it would have been me who did the lying, because I was the one on the show making the accusations. I was the one on the show talking. I was the one on the show putting positions out there. So I don't know if I also lied. I did go through some of it. There were some inaccuracies in that, but I don't have enough time to go through an hour and 50 minutes of footage on stream. I might do it off stream, and hopefully, you know what? It's an open invitation. I can say this right now. Jackson, if you want to talk about Syria, or if you think anything I said was wrong, this is an open invitation. This is an open invitation. I believe that your position on Syria is probably incorrect, and from what I saw, I'm pretty confident in that, and I'd be willing to talk to you at any time. It can be on my stream, it can be at your stream, it could be in the back of a Wendy's, it could be at McDonald's, it could be at 5th, 7th Street, I don't care. It could be at Black Lives Matter Plaza, DC, we go out to lunch, you can take me out on a date, I don't care. Anywhere, really, to talk about Syria. I love talking about Syria. Syria is my forte, and I'd love to talk to you about it anytime. Anyway. That aside, because again, I'm not going to go through an hour and 50 minutes on stream. He made a criticism of my criticism of him, so I wanted to, watch the video, see if he had any accurate criticisms. Maybe I'll take something away from this, and listen to these criticisms on stream, because you know what? I don't want to kind of cower away from criticisms. I always like to tackle them directly. This is pre-watched, of course, because I wanted to make sure I had sources beforehand. Wonderful. Let's open this up. A lovely little intro.
One person who responded to my tweet was I didn't know this person, and I'm not trying to cast shade. They have a number of followers. I think they have a few, they have 20 or 30,000 followers on Twitch streamer. Dylan Burns. I don't know if you have heard of Dylan, but Dylan is a policy consultant, environmental city board member, and former foreign policy advisor to Michaela Wilkes.
That is my favorite Twitter bio.
And Jill Carter. So Dylan responded to my tweet, this tweet I showed you regarding AOC's comments, or lack thereof, really, on Medicare for all. And this is what Dylan had to say. Joshua Collins, Guide to Politics. Twitter is not real life. How many times did Biden tweet about the Keystone XL pipeline before he blocked the permit? What?
Nothing wrong with this tweet. For anyone who doesn't know Joshua Collins, the reference to Joshua Collins' Guide to Politics, Joshua Collins was a guy on Twitter who got a lot of money through like making posts on TikTok and Twitter for his congressional race and ended up only getting like 1.4% of the vote. And at first, he even lost to somebody who died in the election. And basically, my statement was, hey, you're putting way too much into Twitter posts. This does not translate directly to reality. Basically, that was the statement. Just like Joshua Collins thought because of all of his Twitter followers, he might win the election and then lost big time.
Well, Dylan, it happened to be something that he campaigned on. So, I mean, he was talking about it.
He did talk about it, but again, just like AOC talks about Medicare for all outside of just being on Twitter, whether it be in speeches, whether it be on like Facebook, for example, other social media apps, whether it be during live streams, which she's done on multiple occasions when she cooks in her kitchen, whether it be with other Congress people. She talks about it off as well. It's on her platform, on her website. You can also see it like echoed on many other sites that she has control over. So it would be in a similar vein. But just because you make, my point was broadly, just because you make tweets about something or you tweet a lot about something doesn't mean you can get it done or will signify whether it gets done or not. Because I really don't like armchair activism from Twitter. I see a lot of it. Joshua Collins was the example I was kind of pulling from. And I thought that your calculations of how much AOC tweeted between when she was elected, before she was elected into office in 2018 to now, was not a proper calculation on whether she continues to support Medicare for all. And I'm going to talk about, and I can't believe I had to do this, I'm going to talk about some Twitter data later to try to show this fact.
It was something he said he was going to do. I will say that he's the fucking president. So if he wants to sign an executive order revoking a permit, he can do so pretty easily. He doesn't really need to tweet about something, stage a popular campaign to inspire millions to get out in the streets and advocate for the passage of a policy that does not have the support of members of Congress already because they're bought out by the private health insurance industry or special interest groups. He can just sign a paper. So it doesn't, I mean, your argument doesn't really apply here, but
my argument was that Twitter does not signify, and how much you tweet does not signify whether something will get done, whether you continue to support it, etc. That Twitter, and using this as the primary calculator, or even a calculator at all, to any like significant extent, maybe like a side point, but to use this as the main point to she abandoned Medicare for all. That's the point you're trying to make. This is not sufficient evidence. This just calculates tweets. That's it. You're just calculating how many tweets you got. We can actually talk about this in a second. I want to see if he's going to get to like some points of response to this yet, and then I'm going to get into it.
I will engage. I'll continue this debate because Dylan does have a number of followers, and I think it's important to address, popular or somewhat popular streamers who are trying to.
Damn, he downgraded me from popular to somewhat popular things, man.
Provide political cover to the squad and to AOC. So Joshua said this. Joshua said, Twitter's not real life.
Joshua, wait, did he just confuse me with Joshua Collins? Look, I don't take offense to people messing up my name, but don't mix me up with Joshua Collins, okay? That is one individual I'm generally offended that if people confuse me with Joshua Collins.
Whatever. I've been making the case throughout this entire stream that I agree, Twitter's not real life, but where has the squad been insofar as actually legislating on behalf of Medicare for all? They've been even more absent.
Okay, so I don't know if he's going to get into it, but let me actually criticize his main point, his original point on how he calculated her tweets to find out that she abandoned Medicare for all. Okay, so there's two things that need to be talked about. How Congress people and elected representatives tweet over time, how large-scale, extremely popular influencers tweet over time, and how election series works. So the first thing I want to show you guys is, I can't believe I had to do this, but this is a graph of tweets that AOC made over time from when she was first started her account in October of 2018 to now, right? And if you notice something about this graph, it is that it is in a downward general trend. And where you'll see spikes is around election season. Like for example, gets elected, goes down, 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 and then you see the lowest amount of tweets she ever made in December and November. And then it starts to go up again with election season, right? Then it went down, down, down again, back up again with the general election, and now it's going back down, down, down again. She tweets more, like basically every other representative. She'll put out more social media content during elections and less not during elections, but also generally it's not only just about during elections or not during elections, it's a general downward trend. And this has to do with the first part, that she's representative, and during her first campaign in 2018, 2019, she's going to put out a ton of content, a ton of messages about what she supports and what are the, like, bedrock of her political positions. She could put out a ton of tweets about Medicare for All. She could put out a ton of tweets about $15 minimum wage. That's where you're going to see the most tweets, is when she's trying to identify herself politically. Because this wasn't somebody, it's different when you go from like governor to Senate or to Congress, because people have a history they can look at for what you believe. If you're just somebody who washed tables and was like a waitress, as far as I'm aware, you have no political identity to New Yorkers. They don't know who you are. And so you need to identify yourself from the general population. So it makes sense that back in 2018 would be where you would see the most she tweeted. And his graph there, if you go back over here, that's the most she tweeted. 40 times between 7/18 to 12/18. And it makes sense. He also didn't include October, but makes sense. Whatever. That's when she's going to tweet the most. Then she gets elected. And the thing is, this is true of all elected representatives. So this would be a criticism you'd have to lobby at all elected representatives. Once they get into office, they engage less with social media. They're going to engage less with social media because, number one, there's not as much of a priority. It's still out there, but not much of a priority in establishing your political identity, because you have established your political identity enough for the general average voter to know to vote for you. And so now it's going to be around maybe specific legislation. Maybe it'll be around stuff you're pushing while in office, or it could be donations.
Delicious $5. Hi, Dylan.
Hello, back. That's the first point. Secondly, this has to do with big influencers. Big influencers, they always tweet less once their Twitter gets bigger. This is just true across the board. Everybody in chat asked me if this is the case, that when you get big and you're an influencer, you just tweet less. Like all the influencers you look at, whether it be Jay Schlatt, Dream, or any of these people on Twitch, this is true across Instagram, everywhere. Once you get larger and you use social media to some extent to get you to where they are, which is true with AOC, you tweet less. And those smaller amount of tweets might have more impact, but you just tweet less. That's true across the board. And that would also be true for AOC, who could also be considered kind of a political influencer due to how big her social media following is. So you're going to see less tweets because she established her political identity. You're going to see less tweets because she's gotten bigger as an influencer. And these could kind of help explain the downward trend in the amount of tweets she's making. So if we acknowledge that there's different political reasons why political and just like logistical or whatever reasons that she's tweeting less generally, then it would make sense that over time she's tweeting less about Medicare for All because she's tweeting less generally, right? If I release 10 statements a day and half of them are about Medicare for All, if I just release 5 statements a day the week next, then of course less of them are going to be about Medicare for All, maybe 2 or 1 of them. And this is true generally. And if you look at the time period where he slotted out, where she only made 1 tweet about Medicare for All, if you look here, it is the least she's tweeted in the entirety of her Twitter career. So this can't really be enough to signify that she no longer cares about Medicare for All, because this could all just be an indication of her tweeting less. She made less tweets, not around election season, and she makes more tweets around election season, like every other politician. Look, the time period he put out, this is the lowest she has ever tweeted in the entirety of her career, and so it makes sense you're going to see the lowest in the entirety of her whole career and amount of tweets about Medicare for All. So it isn't that she's not prioritizing Medicare for All in her Twitter, it's that she's not prioritizing Twitter posts, and she's making less Twitter posts, as most politicians do as they get into office, and secondly, as most big influencers do once they get big online. So I don't think this, which you are using as an indication to determine whether AOC still truly supports Medicare for All, and that is what he's trying to do. If you look at the thumbnail and the video he made on AOC, look, AOC gives up on Medicare for All. Oh my God, what is it? What is it gonna be? You click it, and he's talking about the amount of tweets she makes. This isn't enough to indicate if she gave up Medicare for All. I was clicking on this video thinking, okay, there's going to be a public statement from AOC saying she no longer supports Medicare for all. There's going to be a public something that I no longer am for Medicare for all. I'm all on board with a public option. But that's not the case. That's not the case. So no. The accusation you're making that this is somehow a large piece of evidence against her supporting Medicare for all doesn't make any sense. Because if you include the fact that, well, if you look at this period of time, she only tweeted about it once, but then you go into that time period, and she probably tweeted about most things only once because she didn't make many tweets. She tweeted the smallest amount of the entirety of her political career right after a highly contested general election, where she's going to tweet less generally. So it's a combination of factors. And most likely, when election season comes back around, she'll be tweeting more about Medicare for all. And now later, Jackson talks about this and says this is a point for his side, but I'll address it then. So obviously, this isn't an indication. If she was tweeting the same amount consistently, always, then maybe he would have a point. I would still have problems with it because I could still bring up the establishment of political identity, how she was going from waiter to political superstar. But maybe you'd have an argument. But no, she has been tweeting less because she's not using Twitter in the same way. A lot of campaigns early on will use Twitter as a way to fundraise off of these big core issues like Medicare for all. And I'm sure if you go back to those 40, a good probably 20% of those tweets were fundraising, like, hey, we want to get Medicare for all, help donate to A.O.C. for that. She doesn't have any purpose for that anymore because she's a political superstar. She could do a Twitch stream and just, like, I don't know, do a little funny TikTok dance and boom, $100,000. She's really good at that. And I think she should use that more. And that's actually a criticism I have of AOC, is that I think she needs to show her ability to fundraise in untraditional manners more in the party to gain leverage. But that's a totally different video. That's a totally different topic. Again, this is not significant evidence for me to really think, wow, it looks like AOC has dropped it. It's not.
Than they have been on Twitter for this policy. So I responded and I said, well, yeah, I agree. But unfortunately, AOC isn't legislating either. She refused to force a vote on Medicare for all during the speakership vote.
Okay, so the thing is, when I think of legislating in favor of Medicare for all, what I think of is you're legislating to build the pathway to Medicare for all, right? Either you're getting it passed, getting co-sponsors, getting people, this isn't legislating, but it's still related to this. You're getting people elected into like Congress or Senate who support Medicare for all, or you're trying to get people into committee positions where they can help get Medicare for all through committee, which is actually, if you ever study local politics, one of the biggest problems of getting legislation through is getting it through committee. Because there will be people constantly at every stage of committee trying to undermine progressive legislation. And that's why committee positions, which later in this he'll kind of downplay, are actually extremely important for progressives to get. And force the vote, even people who advocate for force the vote acknowledge that it would not have achieved Medicare for all. The psychologically, there's a lot of reasons why people would be in favor of force to vote. Some people argued that we could use it as kind of like a rallying cry to bring more attention to Medicare for all. But I would argue that you should do that more during elections. We'll get to that later. We can do that more during national crises like COVID, for example, which Bernie tried to do to great extent on the campaign trail during the last kind of death blows of his campaign. There's other moments you should actually be taking advantage of. And this one with force to vote, I think taking that legislative L while losing committee positions, both of those things would not have advanced Medicare for all at all in this country. What we would have done is had a vote that would have failed. Everyone acknowledges it would have failed. And so all those people who forced a vote are not going to get committee positions that he would have gotten before because everybody's going to be really pissed at them. Which I don't care about getting people angry. I'm fine with getting establishment types angry, but I'm not going to get them angry and pissed at me for literally nothing. And then after we lose, you know what the talking point's going to be going forward? We had a vote on Medicare for all. It lost by a landslide. And here's another thing. Think about all the people who are like the insurance-backed types that are going to be very difficult to get on board. You're not going to get them to sign on for Medicare for all. Maybe if it was a close one, you could get them to sign on under the idea that if we get Medicare for all passed, the backlash they get from the lack of funding from healthcare providers, like private the private healthcare industry could be made up for public support through the fact that they helped get through what would be the most revolutionary piece of healthcare agenda in America's history. That wouldn't exist here. You're not going to get those people to come over. You're just going to put them in a difficult political position. That's all you're going to do. Oh, burrito. Thank you very much. So it ends up being completely worthless to me. Now, you can disagree with me on forced to vote. I know people who are my good friends who I disagree with forced to vote, right? But since there's a strategic disagreement on forced to vote between all progressives who are in favor of Medicare for all, I went down to South Carolina. I canvassed for Bernie. On my own dollar, I went to South Carolina to canvass for Bernie. I loved Bernie. I loved him in 2016. I loved him in 2020. My main issue was healthcare because I watched my mother slowly rot. And the last conversation I had with her was how terrified she was going to lose her health insurance. So it's not that I don't support Medicare for all. I disagree on strategy. And if you have a strategic difference with AOC, that's different from an indication that she doesn't support Medicare for all.
She voted to subsidize private healthcare premiums through.
Again, that is a red herring. Just like forced to vote, it's a red herring. It's clicking over here. It's like, hey, look over at this shiny light, this thing that I don't like. Wow. Could have got Medicare for all without it. No, a vote on that wouldn't have determined whether we got Medicare for all or not. It wouldn't have got us further on Medicare for all. Please explain to me how that would have gotten us further on Medicare for all, or that would have gotten us Medicare for all, because it wouldn't have. That's a red herring. It wouldn't have gotten us any closer to Medicare for all, as I responded and told you.
Through that COBRA subsidy plan for 6 months. She said she would accept a public option in place of Medicare for all.
This is leaving out some key language, and he's going to bring up an article later, and he's going to leave out the beginning of it, but leave the end of her statement. So we'll get back to that later.
And she refused to demand the implementation of Social Security Act Section 1881 Alpha amid a pandemic.
So this right here, I've heard this. I was on the Dystopian Times podcast with Humanist Report, lovely individual. And on there, there was the talking about the Medicare for all rallies around the nation. This was before, the whole neo-Nazi scandal, how they were a speaker. Still, I would tell all my supporters to still go out to these rallies. One bad apple hopefully didn't spoil the whole bunch. If another incident like that happens, though, I would actually tell people to stay home because they're making Medicare for all look bad. But let's just hope it doesn't happen again. I would still advocate for you guys to go out to your local rallies in favor of Medicare for all. But it's this magic bullet that people are proposing to Medicare for all. People are suggesting that Joe Biden has the power right now to sign Medicare for all into law through this because of something that happened in Montana. Now, not only is this wrong, it's extremely misguided and misrepresentative of what exactly even attempting this would do. But he's going to talk about it later, so we'll address it later.
Which would have guaranteed Medicare for all to all people who are being impacted by this pandemic in the United States. Now, those are all pretty, reasonable things for someone to do who is legislating.
Now, forced to vote, I disagree with. The second thing, red herring. Third thing, what was the third thing again? She said he would accept a public option. We'll talk about that later. But her statement was 100% accurate. She was 100% right. And he's going to misrepresent her by leaving out a certain segment of what she said. And again, the last one is not the magic bullet you think it is, but I do agree with you that it might be something we should attempt. That it sounds like some type of longest type Huey Long type Democratic play, and I actually like it. But again, that wouldn't be in her power. That would be within Joe Biden's power. But again, it's all up in the air of exactly if it even would work legally in the first place. We'll talk about that later.
States. Now, those are all pretty, reasonable things for someone to do who is legislating in favor of Medicare for all, but she's not doing those things. So Dylan, I want to ask you, if you think Twitter's not real life and you're trying to, provide some form or another political cover to AOC in response to my comments and my attack on her surrounding her lack of, actual fight for the policy, where do you see her legislating?
Now, he's going to follow this up by saying co-sponsors doesn't count. Now, this is something that I would only hear from somebody who has never, ever actually watched government function. As in, watch how legislation builds up and eventually gets passed. Now, we're going to talk about some stuff she did around the issue of health. Since all the things you propose wouldn't have enacted Medicare for all, then I could talk to you about the stuff she is currently trying to help get through that wouldn't wouldn't actually institute Medicare for all. Since you can bring up random stuff that wouldn't have gotten us Medicare for all, then I can bring up random stuff on the issue of health issues on the issue of health as well that wouldn't get us Medicare for all. But first, I want to say, because he's about to say this, co-sponsors 100% is trying to legislate. You need co-sponsors to get stuff through. It's building momentum. As more Democrats declare support and sign on to be co-sponsors, more will follow. That's not a promise in legal writing that they're going to vote for your legislation, but it is building momentum for your legislation. And every time somebody writes in to co-sponsor, and this was one of the main things that I heard from Forced to Vote people as to why we should do Forced to Vote, every time you do it, that district, that person who co-sponsors, they have a conversation. Because somebody will inevitably say, wait, this person just co-sponsored this legislation? What is it? Then you have a town hall. Maybe that congressperson or senator in question can go down and have a town hall with their constituents talking about why they co-sponsored it. Maybe the constituents themselves will talk about it as they discuss how their representative just did that, just became a co-sponsor. There's a lot of momentum that can build down on the local level and as well as the legislative level. People follow each other. Politicians are supposed to be the bold leaders, but they're also sheep. They will follow what other people say. If they hear, oh, all these 5 people just co-sponsored Medicare for all, it's going to be a lot easier for them to jump on that boat. And that is a good thing, to build the momentum, to have those discussions on the local level as you build co-sponsors and build up the momentum. This is how basically all legislation in the United States gets passed on the local level, whether that be county, state. And I saw this happen firsthand when I was working in the Maryland General Assembly. It wasn't an extremely long time, but when I was there, I saw $15 minimum wage pass on the state level. And it was through this method. I saw Corey McCray, State Senator Corey McCray, do his speech as people yelled at each other about the issues and eventually got through as more of the more conservative Democrats heeded to the momentum as more people jumped on board and jumped on at the last second to get it through. There was stuff that I wanted added to it, like tying it to inflation and the standard of and the cost of living, stuff like that. But we got 15 through. Should have been more. I agreed with Ronald Young and his criticisms about it when it came to service workers, but we got it through, and it was through this method. And that's how all legislation basically gets passed. It's not a magical, we force the vote so many times and it gets through. That's not how it works. So yeah, that is actually important. Also, she has helped to get people like Jamal Bowman elected. Getting more people elected is important to getting legislation through if those people who are getting elected support said legislation. And a good case study for why she still supports Medicare for all is she is still supporting challengers to powerful incumbents like Jamal Bowman. Jamal Bowman challenged a elite party establishment fella, somebody who was, I think he was the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee at the time, a very powerful individual, and he won through partially her support. That support was integral in him winning. One of many chess pieces. And what does Jamal Bowman support? Medicare for all. Now, maybe you're going to also question Jamal Bowman's true support for Medicare for all or the other progressive Democrats. Now, of course, in response, he will bring up the fact that she has raised funds for people who don't support Medicare for all. But we're going to get into the specifics. We're going to talk about Senator Gary Peters. We're going to get into specifics later as it brings up that criticism, because it's a 20-minute video. I don't want to stay too much on this point. But no, co-sponsors count. Getting other people elected does also help. And that's something that this is the only chance I'll be able to actually bring it up. And let's actually talk about some of the legislation she got on the issue of health, since the things he brought up to show that she wasn't supporting Medicare for all was things that would not institute Medicare for all. Then I have things that would not institute Medicare for all, but is really good legislation around the issue of health. Here's a great one right here. H.R. 3755, to protect a person's ability to determine whether to continue or end a pregnancy, and to protect a healthcare provider's ability to provide abortion services. My version of Medicare for all, as I would hope everybody else's version of Medicare for all, would also help when it comes to reproductive health. That's why this would be important to building the path, if you're going to say these are important to building the path. Next, this bill alters certain funding and payment mechanisms and establishes several requirements to Puerto Rico's Medicaid program. Among other changes, the bill increases federal medical assistance percentages from 55% to 83% through FY 2029, beginning in FY 2030. The FMAP must be calculated. I know this is a bunch of legal jargon, but we got to get through this. Must be calculated in the same manner as for states. Puerto Rico must also expand its Medicaid program to include certain items, services, and populations that states are already required to cover. Failure to do so results in a reduction of applicable FMAP. Next one, we're doing this all day, and that one for clarification was HR 3371. Next one, HR 1368. This bill creates a grant program for states and local governments to train and dispatch mental health professionals to respond instead of law enforcement officers to emergencies that involve people with behavioral health needs. While this is not directly tied to the issue we're talking about, I did want to bring up this legislation because while it's not tied to Medicare for All or even expanding like healthcare, I wanted to bring this up because this is a bill that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, and I don't really know when it comes to other segments today whether we're going to talk about this. So this is unrelated, but I did want to bring it up. And finally, HR 959. This bill directs multi-agency efforts to improve maternal health, particularly among racial and ethnic minority groups, veterans, and other vulnerable populations. It also addresses the maternal health issues related to COVID-19. I believe that My Medicare for All would also help disadvantaged populations and historically oppressed populations as well. Now, does any of that enact Medicare for All? No. Do they all have to cover the same issues, except for, of course, the third example, that Medicare for All would help address? Yes. So the same things you're suggesting that she does, this should also meet your criteria. If you're suggesting things that wouldn't achieve Medicare for All, that are good things that she's doing on the pathway to it, these would be examples of it. On top, of course, the co-sponsors, which you disregard, and her helping to get people elected who support similar policies.
On behalf of Medicare for All. And please, I'm begging you from the bottom of my heart, please don't point out a fucking co-sponsor list. I don't care about co-sponsor lists.
Says somebody who's never, ever stepped foot in the legislature.
I really don't care about co-sponsor lists. That means absolutely nothing to me. That means nothing to me.
That really explains to me your political position here. It really does.
I don't care. Because a co-sponsor list is not a vote.
And yeah, it was Elliot Engel. He was the chair of foreign relations. Yep. That's who Jamal Bowman beat.
Until we have a vote, it means nothing.
It helps build dialogue on the local level, which was the whole purpose of Force to Vote. So it doesn't make sense to me that you wouldn't support it. And secondly, it helps build momentum within legislatures. It helps get other people to sign on. And when people sign on, you think, well, that doesn't mean anything to me. But it does say something. Stuff like that, if you are backed by healthcare companies, if you sign on as a co-sponsor, you're going to get calls from them. You're going to get heat from them. That could dry up other avenues. But people are hoping that it's going to be able to allow you to get more grassroots donations the same way AOC does. People trying to follow that quote-unquote AOC model, right? It is actually important. Is it the end-all be-all? No. We know that people will jump ship if the ship's going down or if it's looking bad. In fact, I think Force to Vote would have made a lot of people jump ship. Because a lot of people, there would have been a massive retaliation against Medicare for All, and we would have seen a lot of people jump ship because they don't want to deal with the political heat if it doesn't mean getting political success. Who would want to get heat from Democratic leadership, healthcare companies, and all the other people in established positions to do this Force to Vote thing, which would really just be an example of purity testing at this point, if it doesn't even mean achieving Medicare for All and benefits for their constituents? You want to know what the local dialogue would be in communities? Did you see the Medicare for All vote fail? Yeah, man, it was crazy. It was like 60 to 70% of the legislature voted against it. That's nuts, man. Damn. And that would be it.
I don't care who sponsors something or who doesn't sponsor something, because they could flip. They could flip in a matter of mere seconds if this comes to a vote. Okay? So please don't point out a co-sponsor list.
I did it anyway. Sorry to inform you.
Showing you right now that AOC has indicated, instead of forcing Medicare for All through Executive Order Section 1881 Alpha,
oh, that's an interesting article.
She said right here in this Axios interview that worst case scenario, we compromise deeply and we end up getting a public option. Is that a nightmare? I don't think so. She says a public option is not a nightmare.
Worst case scenario, and then what's the thing you you highlight. She said, not a nightmare. What she said is 100% true. Worst case scenario? Does that sound like a ringing endorsement of a public option? How can you be in support of so many things that would be beneficial for healthcare, in your opinion, for the United States that doesn't get us Medicare for all, and you want her to push on those, but then she says, last choice, not really my primary objective, not really the thing I support. She says, this right here is not my cup of tea. Worst case scenario. That is almost like a condemnation. Worst case scenario, public option. And that is used as an indication that she's abandoning Medicare for all? If I'm an advocate for, say, I'm a big boxing guy, so I'll make a boxing reference. If I'm an advocate for a boxer to do infighting, that's when you get close to a fighter and fight. If I say this is what we should do, but at worst case scenario, just go southpaw, which is like, you know, you go left-handed, basically. That isn't like a ringing endorsement of going southpaw. That's saying, okay, if this fails, we should still try to do something that might win and help us win and must help us do stuff. In this instance, a public option, quite literally anything, including a public option, would be better than our current healthcare system. A public option would mean that we would have a public option competing with private healthcare companies, which would be publicly sponsored. This would not only go decrease the cost of healthcare for people on the public option and help cover tons more people. It would also make private health insurance companies have to decrease their prices and increase the quality of their service because now they have a public competitor. A public competitor whose hopefully main objective wouldn't be profit, but it would be covering people. That would be a genuinely good thing to do. In fact, I would call it one of the stepping stones we should go through to get to Medicare for all. Worst case scenario, and that's her worst case scenario. And you're going to use that as an example of her abandoning Medicare for all? It's her worst case scenario. That's extremely disingenuous to try to use this as an indication that she's abandoned Medicare for all, for her saying if we can't get it through, we'll do this instead. I think every legislator should have a backup plan. Like if I can't get my plan A, worst case scenario, we should go plan B. That should be true about everything. If I can't get $2 trillion of funding for this bill I want to get through, then we should try to get $1.8 trillion by appealing to this guy instead. Is that meaning, oh, he's abandoned $2 trillion? No. It's being honest about political reality. Bernie Sanders would not, if he got into office and he won, when this article was released, when he was still in the campaign trail, he would not have been able to just magically make Medicare for all a thing. So if he can't, using a stepping stone to get there and building up to it through legislation, like you're suggesting she should do with the options you put forward to legislate the Medicare for all, which wouldn't have gotten us Medicare for all, but would have been stepping stones to get there. I think her calling that the worst case scenario makes sense.
Maintaining the entire private health insurance infrastructure in the United States, not a nightmare, when Bernie Sanders himself was out there campaigning saying we were going to get Medicare for all passed through executive order in the first week of my presidency. And she's like,
and if he said that, which I don't remember, maybe he did. I'll just assume he did. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. My chat will correct me if he didn't. It wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have. He can't do that. You can't do that through executive order. There's things that are kind of like it and maybe kind of similar in a weird kind of like crazy mirror that you see at a fun park type of way, but he wouldn't have been able to do that. He doesn't have the power. He isn't a wizard. He can't magically just wave a wand and something's been put into evidence. We live in a democracy. The idea that a president of the United States through executive order could completely revamp the entirety of our healthcare system like that by just becoming president is ridiculous. There's a reason why Donald Trump failed at destroying the ACA. It is because we had a legislature. If he could have done it by executive order, Donald Trump would have done it by executive order. He liked to do everything by executive order. Now, there is one tiny thing that might fail my argument, and it's an article you're going to talk about later. But I've read that article. I've read the proposal you're going to propose, and it doesn't say what you think it says.
Like, you know what? Fuck that. I want public. I think public option would be fine. At a time when
she didn't say, oh my God, she said it wouldn't be a nightmare, and it was worst case scenario. This is the article. It's from the American Prospect.
Out rightfully so that Biden could give everyone in America Medicare through Section 1881 Alpha. And again, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, I did a great live stream with Lee Camp about Section 1881A and with DJ Joe Nice. It was very informative conversations, the both of them.
I heard about this on the Dystopian Times podcast. I was skeptical of it then, did research, and I had the right to have skepticisms. This is an interesting idea. Let me let him finish, but it doesn't do what he thinks it does.
1881 Alpha of the Social Security Act is codified language of the statute that refers to any individual subject to environmental exposure, though it was well understood at the time that this was about Libby, Montana. Let me read a little bit more here. They say the people of Libby, Montana, population 2,628, share something in common with the rest of the developed world, but not their compatriots in the United States. They all have access to single-payer Medicare for All system. As part of the Affordable Care Act, the residents of Libby who were exposed to hazardous airborne asbestos from a vermiculite mine owned by the W.R. Grace Company were made eligible for Medicare for free at the discretion of the Social Security Administration and the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. It was codified in Section 1881 Alpha of the Social Security Act. In addition to that, I'm sorry, Dylan, I know I'm really hitting you over the head with all the details here, but when you make an argument, it is important to back them up with facts.
Yo, 1 second. 1 second. Where is it? I think, do I have anything here? Do I? Sorry, I'm out of like my pills that help with like smugness, help address that. But dude, like I'm just acting how I am. I get excited. I'm an excitable person. But dude, you don't need to be so fucking smug. Definitely when you're so fucking wrong.
Samir Khan brought this to my attention, and this stuff is really shocking, potentially the most shocking point of this whole conversation. Around the time she replied to Jackson, December 11th, explaining her anti-force the vote position, she was fighting for committee spots. She was probably sucking up to Pelosi for committee seats, and Pelosi has a history of bribing Democrats with committee seats for votes. Rice and AOC were later rewarded. So you can see, Samira linked a bunch of articles here, screenshotted them. Pelosi re-elected speaker despite narrow majority. You can see here the California Democrat and her allies lobbied members over the last several weeks to secure support. Kathleen Rice then beat out AOC for an important committee seat. Pelosi successfully flipped several of the Democratic defectors who didn't support her 2019 effort, including Reps Kurt Schrader of Oregon, Kathleen Rice of New York, Ron Kind of Wisconsin, Jen Cooper of Tennessee, and Jason Crow of Colorado. AOC and squad allies named.
By the way, guys, look up Jason Crow leaked audio Steny Hoyer, and look how Steny Hoyer talked to the opponent of Jason Crow and just tried to strong arm him out of the race. It was one of the things that motivated me to get on the Michaela Wilkes campaign.
The House Oversight Committee expected to influence Biden. She went on here to say a couple of years ago, both Presley and Tlaib, and presumably the entire squad, leveraged their votes for Pelosi to secure committee seats, reported by Politico, New York Times, and others. Presley even admitted to it to CNN. For example, Rep-elect Ayanna Presley of Massachusetts told CNN she decided to support Pelosi after being promised a position on the gun violence task force. Ms. Presley, who won her seat in Massachusetts after ousting...
He says this like it's bad. This is a good thing to do. I know that this is going to sound like an outrageous thing, but what he's talking about is what I would have expected them to do and was the smart thing to do.
An incumbent Democrat in a primary used her private meeting with Ms. Pelosi to extract a promise that Ms. Pelosi would bring up a bill early in the new Congress, have made clear that their support may come at a price, as you can see in that bottom one. And then the third tweet Samir put out here.
Okay, he's just... Okay. Can I just make a general, criticism of just general political commentators in general? And this is not directed specifically at Jackson. Political commentators need to learn to not just read articles word for word. I do it too, but then I do it and then I hear other people do it. And it's I would never do that. And then I go do it. When you do, just summarize it. People are coming to you as a political, you can summarize it. Okay. You could have just boom and said they all leverage their weight for political committee positions for the votes for the Pelosi. Done. That's all you need to say. Anyway, first thing, the idea that Biden right now could sign Medicare for all for everyone. Now, at here, he doesn't say Medicare for all, he talks about Medicare expansion, but later he calls it Medicare for all, as somebody could he says Biden could sign it, Medicare for all, right now. That is completely inaccurate. What he's talking about is a kind of radical expansion of what that part of the legislation was supposed to do when it comes to the ACA. It's a radical expansion of that isn't necessarily impossible. And that's the thing about it. It isn't necessarily impossible. This is the article he's talking about. What this article does is give a rundown on how Biden could use existing law that was meant to specify to a specific situation in Montana to basically cover all Americans with Medicare. And people are saying that this is the secret Biden bullet to Medicare for all. Now, there's a million problems with this, right? Now, the first thing I want to say before anything, I think we should try it. I think we should get a bunch of lawyers together. I don't know whose office should do it. Hey, maybe this is something. Instead of AOC going out and demanding that this be done, maybe AOC could go out and get lawyers together to check if it even could be done first. But despite putting the legal ability for this to happen in the first place aside, because some people say it can happen, it's completely untested, but let's assume that it could work. And let's say it did work. Number one, we all acknowledge AOC couldn't personally do that. Maybe she could demand it after finding if it's even applicable in this situation. And number two, this isn't Medicare for all. This, once again, is not Medicare for all. This is expanding to covering, if it worked, which again, it's really shaky if it even would. If it did work, though, it would not cover the issue of deductibles, co-pays, or premiums. We would still have those. We would still have private health insurance providers. Dental, vision, hearing, all of these things would still not be covered. That isn't Medicare for all. That's just a Medicare expansion to people affected by COVID. Not to mention the fact this doesn't deal with the issue that we don't even know, because a lot of this has to do with the long-term health effects of pollutants and contaminants. Again, a lot of legalese. We don't even know the entirety of the long-term health effects. So it's shaker on that. We don't know if this would work. If it would, we should try it. But this wouldn't achieve us Medicare for all. And yet mental health care, it wouldn't cover mental. This would just be an expansion. So when you say legislating for Medicare for all, this is legislating for a Medicare expansion, which you could say is a step towards Medicare for all. But then you're criticizing her for saying last chance, last hope. She will pick a public option, when that would be a step for Medicare for all. And you criticize her for saying that would be her kind of like her last option, if the worst case scenario. So later you would call this Medicare for all. This is not Medicare for all. This is not the ability for Biden to sign Medicare for all into law. We don't even know if this would work. This is untested, unscrutinized. Maybe it would. And I like the tactic. I like the idea. If you read the article, it basically talks about a theme of how Biden should try to use existing legal code to try to get healthcare improvements through. And I think that's a really good idea. That if we see that there's no current legislative path for Medicare for all, which does not exist right now, I don't care what anybody says, it does not exist right now, then use the existing legal code and see how far we can bend it while staying in the bounds of the law. We don't need to get dictatorial up in here, but see how far we can bend it. This right here is not Medicare for all. It would not achieve us Medicare for all. And so the same criticism you're lobbying at AOC for saying that worst case scenario, no public option, could easily be thrown at you for saying this untested legal theory maybe thing that could be attempted, which I do think we should if we can, would not achieve us Medicare for all either. This isn't Medicare for all.
Tweeting about Medicare for all once in the last 6 months. AOC tweeted twice about.
Oh, wrong one.
From Politico. It wasn't a coincidence that moments after Nancy Pelosi.
Oh, and I didn't address this. If we were not going to get anything out of force to vote, and the only other option to Nancy Pelosi at the time was somebody to her right, fact check me on that. How are they going to mount a challenge to Nancy Pelosi? Who else is going to rise through the limits? And if the odds are stacked against them already, and that the only other challenger to Nancy Pelosi would most likely be a right-wing individual, and when I say right-wing, I mean as in to her right, using your position as one of the votes on the edges of the party to get committee positions is the smartest thing to do. As I talked about, one of the important parts of getting legislation through is committees. Committees makes legislation live or die. Even if something is as popular can be, if it dies in committee, I'm sorry, it died in committee. So AOC, Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar, the whole squad, I hope Jamal Bowman does the same next time a vote comes around. Using their position and leverage to get committee positions is the smart thing to do. Because it's not just a game of having the most people in Congress or having the most people in the Senate or having the presidency or building these campaigns. We also need to actually know the knowledge of how the sausage gets made, and it gets made in committees. So if we're going to get Medicare for all through, if we're going to get any of the things we went through, $15, anything, we're going to need committee positions. So I don't disagree with them using this leverage to get progressives on committee positions. In fact, it makes me quite happy. The whole time, if you go back and check my coverage of the scenario, I was saying, yes, do this. Use your leverage. I always hear from so many people that the squad needs to use their leverage to get things. Then they get committee positions that are going to be needed to get legislation through, and now it turns into, well, they just did this to benefit themselves. When progressives have more power, we as a unit of the progressive left have more power. You need these committee positions to get things done. If not, we just have like an unorganized mob of lefties tweeting from Congress.
Promised progressive House leaders more power in the next Congress. A host of liberal groups announced they were supporting her for Speaker. Hate to hit you with the facts, Dylan, but these are the facts.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. What do you mean, hate to hit me with the facts? You just gave me a present.
And if you're going to come at me, I would expect that you would have at least informed yourself as to the hit.
I knew all of this. I knew all of this. What do you mean inform myself? All of that was irrelevant to what I was saying about how you were trying to dictate that because she didn't make the correct number of Twitter posts, then she doesn't currently support this policy enough for me. And this amount of Twitter posts means I could release a headline that says AOC abandons, gives up on Medicare for all, with the worst picture of AOC glaring into the camera as physically possible you could find. Oh my God. And you know what everyone was expecting when they clicked that video? They were expecting AOC saying, hello everyone, yeah squad, I just want to tell you that Medicare for all is really a downer, really not on fleek, you know? Doesn't make me say yas. I mean, sheesh, we should really get rid of Medicare for all as an idea. What we should do instead is actually the public option. I mean, it's publicly available. That's the best option if you get what I'm saying, squat. No, that's not what I got. What I got was just a bunch of data about her tweets that could be logically explained through how campaigns work, through how social media influence works, and through just a graph showing that she's just been tweeting less generally, so it makes sense that she's tweeting less about Medicare for all.
History of AOC and the squad as a whole, insofar as their relationship with Medicare for all as a policy and their own efforts to virtually abandon that policy or abandon the efforts that could have brought up a floor vote on that policy to, in fact, do something that carries no...
Why would I go for a floor vote if we're just going to fail? Like, if I'm in the... I'm not going to throw a ball into the end zone if I'm just going to pelt a referee knowing immediately this is going to fail. It's pointless.
No weight for the American people, especially for those who are struggling at the hands of this.
And we could have done it through co-sponsors, for example. Starting dialogue on the state level and on the local level, and also building momentum in the legislative level. It's a double whammy. Why force the vote? It seems pointless.
Brutal, rapacious, for-profit health insurance system. And that is ensuring committee seats and assignments for the squad members. It's ridiculous. Okay, so... I mean, this is the truth. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. So then Dylan went on to do a live stream react to my...
Okay, I didn't go on to. I saw it while I was live streaming. I think that's what happened. Did I? I don't remember. It doesn't really matter anyway.
To my tweet. We'll watch that.
By the way, look at this. AOC has abandoned the policy she was elected to fight for. She tweeted about Medicare for all. This is how policy is done. What you support is determined by how many times you tweet about it.
Again, DylanBurnsTV. I want to point out that I've been probably the most vocal critic of AOC's abandonment of Medicare for all when it comes to actual legislation and putting up policy fights.
And then you propose all this stuff that wouldn't have helped us get Medicare for all, and the things that could have been talked about as a stepping stone to Medicare for all, you criticized her for doing when it came to a public option. So it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, how are you criticizing her?
I'm also just pointing out now that she won't even talk about it on Twitter, which is pretty much all she ever used to do anyways, was talk about...
Yeah, but she used to be on Twitter all the time. You want to know why? Because before, she wasn't in Congress. Then she got in Congress. And you want to know what? When people are in Congress doing stuff, they don't have enough time to be doing this. If I get elected to the city council or anything, you're probably going to get less tweets from Dylan because I'm going to be too busy working, doing speeches, doing stuff besides just tweeting. She was trying to establish a political identity. She's been tweeting less overall. Big influencers tweet less overall as they get larger. Politicians tweet less once they get elected. This is just true across the board. Your criticism here could be applied to every single politician, big influencer, campaign in the world.
These policies on Twitter. Now she won't even do that. So again, I would challenge you to find evidence that would, I guess, lead more to your side of the argument that she is in fact fighting for this policy and she is in fact legislating for this policy, because I haven't seemed to find it. I haven't seen anything that convinces me that she is. And now she's not even talking about it on Twitter.
Okay, number one, that's not how policies are chosen. That is not how policies are chosen. It is not by how much you tweet about them. You want to know how much Biden tweeted about the stimulus bill in comparison to other things? Probably a lot less. What was one of the first things he got through? The stimulus bill. How many times did Biden tweet about canceling the XL stuff?
You mean the stimulus bill that he said and he did tweet about was going to be $2,000 and then it was $1,400? Oh yeah, that stimulus bill. Thank you. Also, homie.
Did he just reduce the entirety of the stimulus bill to the fucking check? It was $1.9 trillion. And also, how is that a criticism of me or like a response to me? That's just Biden. What if you would have criticized Biden? Fine, I'd be happier with a bigger stimulus check. Would have helped me more. Would have helped other working people more. But let me be clear. When I was campaigning for Warnock and Ossoff in Georgia, and people won't believe me, okay? People won't believe me. I don't care. I was talking to people, and this is how I was instructed to talk to people and explain to them that, hey, $1,400 on top of $600. Don't we want extra money? Don't we want more money to get through this pandemic? We need our government to actually do something for us. Now, I will definitely agree that the messaging was not consistent on that, and they should have been more clear. Like, I think something along the lines of 600 ain't enough would have been like a better slogan than like showing the 2,000 on the check. But again, I don't, what is this? I don't know how it's relevant.
He can do that pretty much with just the snap of the finger, right?
He can't, what?
Thank you. Also, homie can do that pretty much with just the snap of the finger, right? He doesn't really need to whip up a bunch of support for an otherwise, Congress that's standing in opposition to him. AOC has to do that if she wants to fight for Medicare for all, because the vast majority of Congress is not.
Did he just say that Biden did not have to? He could just snap the stimulus bill into existence? Or did he say that he could snap Medicare for all into existence? Both statements completely untrue. Things he got through the stimulus bill. How many times did Biden tweet about canceling the XL stuff?
You mean the stimulus bill that he said and he did tweet about was going to be $2,000? And then
he did tweet about it, but so does everybody tweet about all legislation he got through. AOC also tweeted about Medicare for all.
It was $1,400. Oh yeah, that stimulus bill. Thank you. Also, homie,
why
can do that pretty much with just the snap of the finger, right? He doesn't really need to.
He can get the stimulus bill through with the snap of the finger. Snap of the finger, guys. There was no debate. I don't know if he doesn't remember like 5 weeks ago or what type of goldfish memory this guy's running off, but there was a huge debate about it. We had to strong arm Joe Manchin somehow to get onto this bill, offer him this, offer him that, talk about, hey, maybe we can do some pork barrel politics. What's some local infrastructure plans we can get in your community? We had to do everything to get these people on board, these Democrats, these blue dogs who have our party by the balls. It wasn't he didn't snap and it was put into existence. The fact is, he couldn't even get it passed through the normal way. He had to do it through budget reconciliation. It wasn't just as simple as a snap. What do you mean it was as simple as a snap to get this? I am blown away. I am blown away, guys. I'm blown away. If that's the case, why hasn't he gotten the infrastructure bill done? If he can just snap it into existence. We've been waiting for like a month now. Oh, wait, it's because there's a ton of negotiation going on right now with Joe Manchin and all these other people because he can't just snap it into existence because it was an infrastructure bill. You can't executive order a giant stimulus like that. He had to actually get it through, and he only got it through budget reconciliation. He did it by the skin of his teeth, and he almost didn't even do that because of Joe Manchin. So no, it wasn't as simple as a snap of the fingers. He had to actually lead on that.
whip up a bunch of support for an otherwise, Congress that's standing in opposition to him. AOC has to do that if she wants to fight for Medicare for all, because the vast majority of Congress is not only opposed to Medicare for all, but they're bought out by the private health insurance industry.
Keystone pipeline. Not a lot, but it was the first thing he did on day one once he got into the White House.
As for that, the Keystone XL pipeline was just, all he had to do was revoke a permit. So if you're, he doesn't have to tweet about that and whip up support and get people out in the streets, get people mobilized, apply pressure on your own elected officials, because
okay, so I said the Keystone XL as just an example, and if you want me to give him a point, I can give him a point that it is true that Medicare for All and Keystone is different due to the ability for Biden to just basically actually snap that into existence. He did not snap the stimulus bill into existence. He had to do it through budget reconciliation, convince Joe Biden, convince Sinema, convince all these people to get it through, and he just did it by the skin of his teeth. I think I'm just going to stay on that one, since I think the Keystone Pipeline argument's a little weaker. But he gave basically the same argument that he could just snap it into existence. I feel like I could say anything that Joe Biden does right now, and he will say snap into existence. That once we get infrastructure bill through, snap into existence. It's not that easy. He actually had the maneuver to do these things.
All he has to do is revoke a permit. He doesn't have to spark a national campaign for a revolutionary policy like Medicare for all, right? All he has to do is revoke a permit. That's not a fair comparison to make.
It was the first thing he did in office. Gets in, day one, one of the first things he does. You want to know what? It wasn't determined by a tweet. It wasn't determined by the little angry bird we know as Twitter. What a fucking stupid position to hold. This is Joshua Collins' guide to politics. Just look at Twitter.
It's not really even a position. Like, my tweet is AOC has abandoned the policy she was elected to fight for.
It is a position because you're taking this data to try to say that she's abandoned the party. The party. She's abandoned Medicare for all. She hasn't. That's what you're doing. If you look at your thumbnail, if you look at your video, she's abandoned Medicare for all. And then your hard evidence is her tweets and the amount of tweets that can easily be explained by more likely scenarios. So again, it's not that your data is incorrect. It's that your data doesn't say what you think it says. It doesn't say that. And it's so the conclusions you're taking from it. For example, if somebody posted 5 children hit by car on this one intersection, and it's like a consistent problem, and it's shown to be a consistent problem, and then you make a video concluding that it was the tooth fairy that did it, and then I'm like, what the hell is this? And then you say, what, is my data wrong? Well, no, I'm not arguing about the data. I'm arguing about the conclusion you took from that data.
And then I went on to explain that she's not even talking about it anymore. So it's like, it's more so just an observation of her abandonment of even talking.
You would need to, the thing is, the only way for this to be, the thing is, data, statistics is some of the easiest stuff you can use to lie and misrepresent. And if you don't include the fact that she's tweeting less overall, the fact that she generally, as she's grown as a creator, has been putting less messages out, and the fact that, like always, and like all politicians, she's going to push on the big issues, like Medicare for All, during election season. Now, he is going to, again, later, try to use, I said this before, but this is the last time I'll bring it up, he's going to use this later as a point against me, but I disagree with how he uses it as a point against me. I'll talk about that later.
Talking about this. And as I've pointed out, I've discussed many a time as to the various ways in which she's abandoned this through legislative means. Now she just won't even talk about it. So it's more so an observation. And if you don't like the observation, then you don't like the reality of the situation. So why are you
not the observation, it's the conclusion you take from the observation.
Providing political cover for her
because the thing is, it wasn't the data you posted below. If you would have just been like, maybe she should tweet more about it, I'd been like, okay. And that would have been it. But you tweeted, AOC has abandoned the policy she was elected to fight for. And then your one source was a bunch of tweets. As in, not the content of the tweets, but the fact that she's tweeting less.
You know this is not a good thing.
What about all the people? Wait, here's a question. Here's a question for a lot of you out there. If a politician doesn't have for Twitter, how would you determine their policies? My God, it would be nearly impossible. That's why all those politicians... We gotta speed through the rest of this. I'm at 1.5 right now. I'm traveling at this at a lightning speed, and I didn't even know it. This felt so much slower than it actually was. If I speed it up anymore, it's just going to be too fast. Who don't use Twitter and end up smashing to people with 50 to 60 to 70 to 80 to 90 to 100,000 followers. They're so tricky because it's just impossible to find their policies. I mean, you could use Google, but who has time for that?
So I guess the point now that Dylan is trying to make is that, like, we know where AOC stands on this issue. So why does she need to tweet about it?
The point I'm trying to make is a wider point about how we can't use this single statistic to determine anything about our political positions. You have to do it with a larger amount of data, because this could easily be explained away, as I did today, as I showed, like, she's been tweeting less overall. That's the point I'm trying to make.
I don't know, Dylan, like, do you think that you can create like popular mobilization for a policy that stands like all the opposition in the world by members of Congress without encouraging your 12 point however million followers to get out in the streets and actually stage a coordinated campaign to fight for this policy? Or do you think that popular support and mobilization is just going to rise out of nowhere? Like, how do you think it happens? Really, I'm dead ass serious. Like, how do you think it happens? You think it just like comes out of nowhere, and then one day we're just like, you know, we're just sitting here minding our own business?
It certainly doesn't just come from Twitter. It has to be a multitude of factors. It could be, on one hand, it could be an event that happens, for example, using COVID as a launching pad to talk about healthcare in this country. It could be an election. Election leads up to the best time to talk about these things, and the best time to put pressure on politicians around issues like Medicare for All. The reason why is they're running for re-election. This is when you can actually pressure them on what their positions are. This is when you can actually pressure them because they want to get donations. If they're going to support Medicare for All, they're going to want to do it to get donations to get re-elected to some extent. So you could basically be like, hey, if you support Medicare for All, maybe we'll get you more donations. Maybe some of these progressive political PACs, which we need to continue to build. That's one of the main ways we're going to get Medicare for All through, is building up political PACs based on this issue, and going to these politicians with these political PACs saying, if you endorse Medicare for All, if you co-sponsor it, we will help fundraise for you. We will get you money. We will give you our call lists. We will do what's necessary. Tweeting alone, this doesn't. Man, I wish I could make these wide franking. You want to know what? I think if I went through the Republican like amount of tweets made about like gun control or critical race theory, we're going to find a trend. And it's not going to be, oh, wow, we see that gun control, tweets about gun controls went down a lot for Mitch McConnell after the election. Well, I guess Mitch McConnell doesn't support gun control anymore. That'd be a ridiculous conclusion. I'd love to see this done to conservative politicians and see if we can come to any of the same, like, waving, like immensely large conclusions that this guy's trying to come to.
And we see a news alert come across our phones that says Joe Biden introduced Medicare for All and signed it into law, and we can all sit here and be like, poggers, we won, we did it. We were just sitting here and we did it. We didn't even have.
He can't do that, did he? See, this is the thing. Later, he
just like, you know, we're just sitting here minding our own business, and we see a news alert come across our phones that says Joe Biden introduced Medicare for All and signed it into law, and we can all sit here and be like, poggers, we won, we did it. We were just sitting here and we did it. We didn't even have to apply political pressure. Or do you think you have to mount a popular campaign to fight for this policy?
When I'm not, of course he can't do that. I acknowledge he can't do that. But, oh my fucking God. None of Twitter and the data you've provided does not prove that she doesn't intend to do that. Okay? Nothing you've proposed would actually get us Medicare for All. Nothing that you've suggested with these tweets is enough evidence to suggest she's abandoned Medicare for All. And the one things that you talk about, the suggestions you make that she could have made as to help legislate towards Medicare for All, she talks about doing it in a different direction than you, with public option, seeing that as a stepping stone, and you criticize her for that. But your option, totally fine. But her option of using a stepping stone to get close to Medicare for All, that's incorrect. That's the wrong way. Public option's a no-no, but expanding Medicare without dental or any of these things, with keeping copays, keeping deductibles, keeping premiums, keeping private insurance. If you keep private insurance, that isn't Medicare for All. That is a proper stepping stone to Medicare for All. Oh, and it's also an untested legal attempt. We have no clue if it even work. Good luck. I'm sorry, man, but this doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I assume, and I'm going to try to be as good faith here, that we both want Medicare for All here, right? We both want Medicare for All. A difference in tactics does not mean that they don't support getting the policy done. And I see this done a lot in political circles, that if somebody wants to do something differently than you, that means they don't actually want to achieve those things. A great example for me is I think the third party people are completely out of this world when it comes to actually getting anything done. I don't think a third party in this country will achieve any real political success, basically ever. That's my genuine belief. I could be wrong, but I'm not going to walk up to some Green Party person, right, and say, I don't think you really want to save the environment because you're doing this instead of what I'm doing. I genuinely believe they do. I just think we have two totally different tactics. And I feel like Jackson here is trying to amount the public option way or the co-sponsor way or getting more people into these positions and offices, getting into these committee positions. Her tactics that she's using, because he's not doing it through Twitter, because she's not tweeting about it all the time now, because she's done a general decrease of tweets. Well, she must have abandoned it. It's too little information to base off such a large conclusion. If you're going to title a video that AOC has abandoned Medicare for all, you're going to have to show a lot more evidence than she isn't tweeting as much about it.
I'm serious. How do you think it happens? Like, come on.
You know, I believe that's a good point. Policy is actually passed through the amount of Twitter likes you get. That's how policy gets through in this country. That's how we get things done, apparently. By the way, of course she would be tweeting 40 times about it during her election and more about it.
That's actually directly, I mean, yeah, I guess it's during the general election, but that was actually after her, after she won her primary. So I didn't look at the 6 months prior to her primary victory, but one could only assume, and maybe I'll do this, one could only assume that she was probably actually tweeting about it.
She would have been probably tweeting about it more during the primary, but still a decent amount during the general. And the reason why is she was a new politician to vote. It feels like we've been with AOC forever because politics travels very fast on the internet, right? But AOC is still a relatively new politician. She's been in office like almost 2 terms. That's it. That's relatively new. She was still establishing her political identity. She did not climb up the same way a lot of politicians climb up. A lot of politicians go like city council, county council, state delegate, state senator, then they run for office. Through that, they establish a political identity. She had none. So she's going to be tweeting a lot more during that period.
More.
To think that I'm going to have like a 1-hour YouTube video up on my channel. The primary argument is about how much AOC tweets. So that's the primary argument. This is all based around.
Before her primary victory, when she was trying to differentiate herself from Joe Crowley, someone who didn't support Medicare for all, right? I mean, one could only imagine. The 40 number is directly after she won her primary, when she was running against a Republican that wasn't even staging a campaign against her, really. So, that's after she won her primary, but she didn't even really need to be talking about it like to win over voters because it was either going to be her or a Republican.
During the lead up to the 2020 election, during the primary. And then it would stay up here afterwards, even though it was no longer an option. And then it shoots down after the election.
I love the mental gymnastics here. Dylan's like,
this right here is so smarmy to me. This is such like I'm a smarmy prick attitude. And that's what bothers me about Jackson. Is I don't think he's a bad guy. I'm an emotive man. How are you going to tell me I'm jumping through hoops when you're asking AOC to attempt unscrutinized legal attempts that we don't even know would work and would not bring Medicare for all, and telling me, hey, she's tweeted less about this issue, she's abandoned it. And that's the you're trying to use Twitter and the amount of tweets calculated through your model to determine that she's abandoned a political issue, and that's your conclusion. And I'm the person jumping through hoops when you're doing this like Twitter math. And now I have to follow it up with more Twitter math. And I'm jumping through hoops, explaining how campaigns work. Yes, people tweet more about their big issues during elections. That's how campaigns work. Do you want to know why? Because they're trying to communicate to the constituency on why they should be reelected to help get those things into office. And here's another thing. You can put the most pressure on politicians during campaign season. You basically go to them and you're like, hey, if you don't support this policy, we won't vote for you. We won't donate. Political PACs will not support you. That's the best time to put pressure on them. Recently, I don't know if a lot of you people saw that, these like kind of like big oil and gas company lobbyists, there was this leaked of audio and footage of him talking about how they woo Democrats. And he talked about people like, what's his name? He's from Delaware. He beat that one really homophobic woman. Chris Coons, Senator Chris Coons, and all these other people like Manchin, on how they right now can't really even talk to the Democrats and Republicans that are up for re-election next cycle. Not the upcoming one, but the one after. And the reason why is they're not up for re-election. They don't really care what those people think right now to a huge extent. They will, of course, try to stay in line so those options will be made available. But those calls from those oil executives are going to mean a lot less to them now than when their campaign's coming up. That's when it's going to matter the most because they're going to want that money. And that's why this oil and gas executive talks about how right now we're talking to the people who's going to get elected in 2022. That's the people who can put the most pressure on. The same strategy that oil and gas executives use is the same one we should use for Medicare for All. We beat the drum the most during campaign season on Medicare for All. We beat the streets and protests for Medicare the most during campaign season because we want to make politicians think that if they don't choose this policy, they're going to lose donations, they're going to lose votes, they're going to lose support, and they're going to lose their office. And the best time to do that is when they're the most vulnerable. Campaign season. So where you will sign up saying, well, this is an example of how she's just saying this for votes, I will respond, this is an effective political strategy. This is when she should be talking about it the most, not the least.
Well, you know, she had to tweet about it after she won her election because, you know, she also, you know,
by the way, this is a primary example on how people who are political commentators on the internet should participate in local politics, state politics, national politics, maybe get involved in a few campaigns, maybe even manage a campaign. It could be a small one before commentating on the internet. I mean, of course, this can't be a hard standard, but if we had more people on the internet who actually have that background, we would get a lot less takes like this.
It to win the election, so she tweeted about it then, but then like after the election she was still tweeting about it a lot and it went back up because, you know, I don't know what I'm saying. She's just progressively tweeting less and less about this. I'm trying to go through mental gymnastics to try and make sense of this.
I'm going through mental gymnastics. He is trying to use Twitter math to determine that AOC has abandoned a political issue. I'm going through mental gymnastics.
Yes, if this commentary doesn't make any sense to you, you're not alone.
Because look here, 40 times and then it plummets 14.
Okay, 40 to 14, got it.
But then it goes up in the lead up to the 2020 election.
By 3 tweets? That's
yes, but it makes... Of course, it's not going to be a hard science like now it's times this amount. Because again, we're not working with like political machines here. We're working with people. But yes, 40 times when she was still establishing her political identity, I'm surprised it isn't more or a steeper cutoff. When you're establishing your political identity, when you're going from waiter that people know because she hands them their Pepsi at a local restaurant to national level politician, you're going to have to communicate your political background, your political experience, your political positions a lot more than 2 years down the line after you've been in office for 2 years and after a giant campaign where you upended one of the most powerful Democrats in the world, Joe Crowley. Yes.
It's not really like a get out the vote fucking like mobilization increase, right? That's just 3 tweets more. It's basically the same.
21, because Bernie's running for office and she wants to talk about how he has Medicare for all in comparison to everybody else after she endorses him. I can't.
The amount of like hoops that Dylan is.
He's just saying that because he can't respond to what I'm saying. He doesn't know how to respond, so he's just saying I'm a mental gymnastics star, right? I'm just doing flips and stuff as he tries to claim that these tweets are enough to claim that AOC's abandoned Medicare for all. Her signature policy issue.
It's currently jumping through to try and make sense of this. It's truly astronomical.
Whose main thing was Medicare for all. Also, let me say, I know there's a lot of people who love this type of like Rocky scenario where this person who was just a working man, you know, shoveling coal, like one day walked up to the senator and said, "Senator, you need to do this thing for workers." And the senator said, "No, I'm fat and evil." And then the coal miner goes out and just like hands out pieces of paper and whoa, now he's the senator. That's not how most elections work. And I just want to advise you that the AOC model is like a miracle model. Like it doesn't work that often because it is like a very long shot and it makes more sense. And I do mean this for politicians. I would advise people, if you can and if you want to, yeah, you can run for Congress, but I would advise people to start at the local level because then you have even more of a direct impact on people's lives and then slowly build up, building ties, building power, building influence. Because when you reach like state senator, you're gonna have a lot more influence and a much better chance of winning the election, 100%. This is not related in a response to anything he said. This is just a tangent about how the AOC model should not be a model that we base our continued political strategy on. Anymore, but endorse that candidate, and then it goes down again when that's no longer an option. And now we'll probably see another spike once 20. Let me also say I'm actually pretty sure that if Jackson was to do this same model on politicians that went from state senator or governor to Congress or Senate, that you'd probably find out that the cutoff was actually a lot different. And the reason being was because they were going from an area where they already had a political identity and did not have to establish one. That their voters, a lot of them, already know who they are. 2022 rolls around.
Okay, so that's my favorite part of the whole breakdown here. Dylan says we'll probably see another spike in her mentions of Medicare for all leading into the 2022 election cycle. Now, why do I find that hilarious? I'll tell you. Because you're
stupid. I'm sorry, man. I can't. This guy's killing me.
AOC is only using Medicare for All as a tactic to get votes, but then once she's in Congress, has secured the seat after the election cycle, she feels as though she doesn't need to talk about it anymore and doesn't need to advocate for it anymore. Then you're proving my point, Dylan.
No, you just don't understand politics, man. That isn't proving your point, because election season is when politicians are most vulnerable. This is like a pretty well-known thing that, oh my gosh, the time where I could lose my job is probably when I'm most vulnerable. And that is when you apply pressure. That is when you hit the drum. That is when you try to get people elected who support your position. And that's when you pressure corporate Democrats who don't support the progressive positions we want them to support. This could be true on $50 minimum wage. This could be true on a Green New Deal, and this could be true, as we're talking about right now, on Medicare for All. That's when you apply pressure to corporate Democrats, and not only that, that's when you advertise on the issue of Medicare for All to get Medicare for All politicians like Jamal Bowman into office. That's exactly what happened in 2020 with Jamal Bowman when he got into office. That people tweeted more about Medicare for All because they wanted to separate him from Elliott, the established, elitist, corporate Democrat who was in his position before. He wanted to draw a distinction between the two on the issue of Medicare for All, and that's why you saw the most tweets about it. Jamal was also trying to do that thing that we've talked about already in this video a million times. He tried to establish a political identity. The establishment of that political identity is super important when you're going from rags to riches stories in these elections. So no, it's the best time to apply pressure to politicians. It's the best time to get people elected into office who support these policies. And it's the best time that you can use political PACs or support financially or stuff that progressive organizations are supposed to wield effectively that we're not doing effectively. And I'm going to talk about that in a different video later. That we're supposed to wield effectively to try to build leverage off of. What you're saying right now is a fun theory. It's great. It's a thing that you could speculate upon, but it could easily just be talked about as this is effective strategy. This is how you apply pressure to politicians. And you just don't know how to apply pressure to politicians. People think that political activism is you get in a line and you march. And you keep marching until the bill is passed. That's not how politics works. That's not how protest works. That's not how activism works. You take key moments in time to go out and protest. There's a reason why Trump people aren't constantly protesting in DC and forced to vote. Look at right-wing tactics. They choose dates like January 6th to gather and try to storm the Capitol. They choose dates like the Million MAGA March and others to apply this political pressure. They choose focal point. There's a reason January 6th was chosen. It was because it was the certification of the vote that Mike Pence had to preside over. The same thing would be true for elections. The same thing would be true for health crises. That's why we should use COVID as an example to launch our healthcare activism forward. Talk about what our healthcare plan should be forward, since tons of Americans didn't have it. That's where this strategy, which you're talking about, this new thing, this new provision that is the magic bullet to all of our problems, which needs to be further tested, that's where it came from. This focal point, COVID. It isn't as simple as just a constant stream of enact Medicare for all, enact Medicare for all, enact Medicare for all. That's not how it works. It's not.
You're fucking proving my point. You're proving the point that she doesn't actually aggressively fight for this issue, and she's only using it to try and get elected.
Aggressively fight for an issue is not just yelling and screaming about an issue. It is not as simple as that. So if she was to just go on Twitter and every day she tweeted Medicare for all, it's been 5 or 20 days since my last tweet about Medicare for all. That's not how it works.
That's my point. Thank you. You literally just said it. Dylan actually tweeted me out, and then I responded. So Dylan said, Joshua Collins' Guide to Politics, Twitter's not real life. How many times did Biden tweet about the XL Keystone pipeline before he blocked the permit? And I responded, and I said, unfortunately, AOC isn't legislating either. She refused to force a vote on Medicare for all. During speakership vote, voted to subsidize private health insurance premiums, said she would accept the public option and replace...
Okay, so the rest of this is just to continuing the whatever, right? Anyway, this isn't where it ends, sadly. This segment's a long one, but this isn't where it ends. Because where it started is where it ended. It went back to Twitter. Okay? And I said I complained about people reading stuff to the audience instead of summarizing. I'm going to do that right now because I'm not the perfect politician, okay? Or the perfect commentator. So, I respond to this actually after he did. And I said none of these things would have achieved Medicare for all. Most of these tweeting patterns could be explained by moving in and out of elections. Their constituents wanted to hear about other issues as well. Also, she said, worst case scenario, we get a public option, which is progress. Not exactly a ringing endorsement, but undoubtedly 1,000,000% correct. Then he quote tweets that, you just proved my point. Everything I listed that AOC has done regarding health insurance won't achieve Medicare for all. No, the thing is, he wasn't listening to me. I was saying everything he just suggested wouldn't implement Medicare for all. None of these things that he suggested would do it. Not that anything that AOC has done would enact Medicare for all, but that would also be a true statement because she doesn't have the power to do that on her own. You just proved my point. Everything I listed that AOC has done regarding health insurance won't achieve Medicare for all. I guess there's no need for debate surrounding this. Then, since you agree, again, that just smarmy prick attitude. I also forgot to list her $160K donations to anti-Medicare for all corporate Democrats. I said I would explain this. How I would explain she's supporting anti-Medicare for all people. Now, let me be clear. It's going to be people like Gary Peters. And I'll explain this in a second. You know what? I'll just read it. I'll be the guy who just reads, okay? I'll just be the reader, okay? Playing word games is cute, but dodging what I said isn't. None of the things you suggested she would do has gotten us Medicare for all, and this new suggestion would not either. These are situations where I could see raising donations for people to be the best strategy. Let's consider our current political situation. We hold a 50 Senate majority, we lose one senator or the presidency, and we lose the majority. Our ability to get things done, like the stimulus bill, which helped cut child poverty in half, would have been impossible to get done through budget reconciliation. This would have been because Senator Bernie Sanders would have not been the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. That's $1.9 trillion gone, not just a stimulus check. We should prioritize funds to progressives. But if we, by the way, let me just make a quick point about this. This stimulus bill cut child poverty in half. It cut it literally in half. Now we need to build upon it to make sure that that statistic stays true, but it just shows how important it was. So again, downgrading that to just that is ridiculous to me. Just the check. It is not just the check. We should prioritize funds to progressives, but if we lose a majority, then we lose our power. Then we literally can't do anything legislatively. It's frustrating, but also reality. Look how close, I said hose, but how close the race was in Michigan for Gary Peters. His opponent didn't even concede. This is why we need a primary Democrats that we have the best odds against and build PACs that help push our issues. So I'd understand someone like AOC raising money for Democrats who she does not align with politically. I will say, though, that there is room for her to condition some of that fundraising on policy concessions. Progressives need to show their ability to move money and fundraise more. Being able to raise a ton of cash and get people easy influence within the party. The easiest way to get influence within a party is raise money. You got to be like an LBJ type political strategist to go beyond that. And that's what we need on the left. If we can do that through our untraditional methods, we gain power. Steny Hoyer has become the second most powerful person in the House, primarily through his uncanny ability to fundraise. Part of the reason why I joined the Michaela Wilkes campaign to challenge him. We need to build our influence through fundraising as well. We should be thoughtful and strategic about it, though. He did not respond to that one, sadly. That's the end of that segment. Anyway, Jackson, I don't know, man. You need to get the smarmy look off your face. You can just talk to me man to man, okay? Anytime, any place, I'm right here. I'm always right here, baby. You can do it in my Discord. I can do it in your Discord. Go to your mama's house, at your daddy's house. Can't do it at my mama's house, but you could do it at my daddy's house. Anywhere. I don't care.